The story begins on April 21st, 2015, with a peculiar call to the police station in Funabashi City, Chiba Prefecture. The caller reported that his acquaintance had not been in contact for several days, and he was growing increasingly concerned. Then he added a chilling detail. "I heard she might have been buried alive." This horrifying news was about an 18-year-old girl named Noguchi Mani. The police immediately launched an investigation. They discovered that Maine had disappeared on the evening of April 19th, after getting into someone's car. No one had seen her since. At just 18, she was still legally a minor. The rumors that she might have been buried alive deeply alarmed investigators. They sprang into action but could not trace her movements after she entered the vehicle. Time passed, and for 5 days, there were no breakthroughs, until the police finally found her body. Tragically, Maine was found dead. Her body was discovered on farmland near Narita Airport in Chiba. The scene was so horrifying it defied description. Her body had been buried in a shallow grave about 1 meter deep. She was on her knees with her hands tied behind her back. A gag was forced into her mouth and a bag had been pulled over her head. It resembled a brutal execution. The autopsy revealed signs of violence on Maine's body, but none of the injuries were fatal. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She had suffocated to death. This meant Maine might have truly been buried alive. The very thought sent chills down the spine. She was only 18 years old. Who could have done such a thing, and why? The police launched an immediate investigation, focusing on Maine's life before her disappearance. They interviewed her acquaintances and began examining her social circle. It soon came to light that Maine frequently borrowed money from friends and people she knew. The amounts were significant for someone her age, and she was not in a hurry to pay them back. This strained her relationships with those around her. But the central question remained: why did such a young girl need such large sums of money? The reason Noguchi borrowed money turned out to be shocking. It was revealed that she spent the money on visits to host clubs. Even more startling was that her fascination with this world had begun back in the 8th grade. At some point, she became involved with a man much older than herself, who, as it turned out, worked at a host club. Noguchi fell in love with him, and this infatuation completely changed her life. To see him, she started frequenting host clubs despite being underage. The man apparently made no effort to stop her, even though Noguchi was just a teenager at the time. Soon, she dropped out of school during her first year of high school. After that, her appearance and behavior began to change dramatically. She bleached her hair and started wearing flashy, provocative clothes that made her stand out among her peers. She continued to visit host clubs, spending exorbitant amounts of money on her favorite host. On one occasion, she bought champagne worth 10 million yen, around $60,000, to make an impression. But where could a teenager get such large sums of money? At first, Noguchi borrowed from her friends, but that source quickly dried up. Then she started working in entertainment establishments where proof of age was required. She was asked to provide an ID, but since she had dropped out of school, she didn't have a student ID card. Instead, she used a photo from her school yearbook. However, this didn't always work. To get another job, she needed ID again, so she began asking her friends for their photos. One of those friends was her former classmate, Yuasa Narami. Noguchi initially asked Narami for a photo from her yearbook, but later began borrowing money from her. She borrowed 1 million yen, around $6,000, and even took Narami's clothes. When it came time to repay the debt, Noguchi simply stopped responding to her. Iwasa, Vyzbeshionaya takim odnoshenium, Nachala rasprostraniat sluki o Noguti sredi obshchik druze. Ona uznala, chto Noguti velasebia takne tolkos ne, noi s drugimi znakomimi, beria unik dengi I fotografii, a zatem zaya. Eog nevdostig predela, I odnajdi ona zajavila. Umenia est znakomi is bandi. Dumayu poras ne razobracia. Na pervi vzgliade to zvučalo kak pustaya ugroza, no okazalos. Chto Iwasa bila seriozna. Čerez nekotoroj vremia ona vastratilas 20letnim mestnim kuliganom po imeni ide kiroki, I raskazala emu o Noguti. This conversation seems unimaginable for teenagers, but it actually happened. Yuasa Narami asked Ide Hiroki to help deal with Noguchi, to take her money and scare her a little. Hiroki immediately agreed and even involved his friend Nakano. Together, they became a trio that planned one of the most brutal crimes. On the night before Noguchi's disappearance, April 18th, Hiroki asked an acquaintance to help find a suitable location to bury a body. They began discussing the details. What would be better? Burying the body after the murder or burying the victim alive? Nakano suggested burying her alive, reasoning that a dead body might bloat afterward. These two men had no personal connection to Noguchi and no conflict with her. They were simply carrying out Narami's request. Hiroki and Nakano moved into action. They bought rope and packing tape from a local store, grabbed a shovel from home, and headed to an abandoned field, where they dug a 1-meter-deep pit. Everything was ready. On April 19th, 4 people got into a car: Narami, Hiroki, Nakano, and a 17-year-old boy referred to in case files as A. He was Narami's boyfriend. Their goal was clear: to capture Noguchi. That day, Noguchi was, as usual, enjoying herself at a host club, and later went with friends to a hotel. Narami and her group were watching her closely. As soon as Noguchi stepped out of the hotel, the car pulled up beside her. Narami got out immediately and began threatening her. "Why aren't you paying back the money? Why aren't you answering my calls?" A witness present at the scene reported that Noguchi looked very confused and terrified. She tried to avoid the conflict and walk away, but Narami stopped her, declaring that she would have to come with them. The girl was roughly shoved into the car. This was the last time she was seen alive. In the car, Narami continued to aggressively demand that Noguchi repay the money. The tension in the vehicle was escalating. Someone then grabbed Noguchi's phone, removed the battery, and turned it off. They also took her wallet, which contained only 300,000 yen, about $2,000. Everything she had. Hiroki gave the order, "Get ready." At that moment, Noguchi's hands and feet were tied, her mouth was gagged with a sock, and tape was tightly wrapped around her. A bag was placed over her head. She was trembling with fear, unable to comprehend what was happening, and looked pleadingly at her tormentors. Narami leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Now you're going to die." On the way to the crime scene, Noguchi was brutally beaten. The blows left numerous injuries on her body, which were later documented during the autopsy. When they arrived at the pre-dug grave, there was no hesitation about what to do. Noguchi was roughly pushed into the pit. She tried to make sounds through the gag, but they were only faint moans. The perpetrators began to shovel dirt over her. None of them paused or second-guessed their actions. They methodically carried out their plan. When it was over, Narami appeared completely satisfied. She showed no remorse, none at all. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. During the crime, Narami was texting a friend, describing the situation as though it were some sort of entertainment. She even sent photos from the scene, showcasing her utter indifference and cruelty. This was not just a murder. It was an act of monstrous brutality, carried out with chilling cold-bloodedness that makes the skin crawl. Narami sent messages to her friends describing the events with shocking ease. "We caught her, gagged her with a sock, beat her half to death, and then buried her alive." She was so scared, trembling all over. Later, the friend who received these messages confessed to the police that he was appalled by her tone. There wasn't a trace of remorse, only joy and pride in what she had done. This became crucial evidence in the case. Fortunately, due to the perpetrator's carelessness, the police quickly caught their trail. First, Narami was so openly vocal about what had happened that rumors spread almost immediately. Second, the crime scene was so obvious, an open area in an abandoned field, that it was impossible to conceal the evidence. Shortly after the murder, all the participants, Narami, Hiroki, Nakano, and her boyfriend A, were arrested. During questioning, they quickly confessed to their actions, but their motives were shockingly senseless. Narami claimed that she decided to kill Noguchi out of fear that she might report the assault to the police. Her explanation was as follows: "I was afraid she'd turn us in, so we killed her." The most absurd part, however, was how Narami described her feelings. "She just annoyed me." Annoyance, according to her, was all it took to plan an abduction and a horrific murder. The first court hearing took place on November 11, 2016. Narami, Hiroki, and Nakano were sentenced to life imprisonment. Narami's boyfriend, A, who was deemed not to have played a direct role in the murder, was sent to a juvenile correctional facility. However, Narami decided to file an appeal. Her argument was, "I didn't personally kill her." This statement sparked a wave of outrage, especially among Noguchi's family. When a journalist asked her if she planned to apologize to the victim's family, Narami responded with defiant indifference, "No." That phrase was the final straw for Noguchi's family. Upon hearing it, the girl's father said, "How can someone not feel even a shred of remorse? That's not a person. It's a monster." Noguchi's father ultimately demanded the death penalty for Narami, addressing the court with an urgent plea. However, her appeal was rejected, and during the final trial, her life imprisonment was confirmed as the ultimate sentence. This case drew enormous attention across Japan. Public opinion was divided. Some couldn't comprehend the motives of the other participants besides Narami. Why did Hiroki and Nakano agree to take part in such a cruel act? One psychologist suggested that their actions were rooted in group psychology. Narami, with her statement, "We'll take her money and bury her," might have set the tone, which was initially perceived as a kind of challenge or joke. Gradually, this evolved into real action. As if under some hypnotic influence, they followed her words, losing their capacity for critical thinking. Perhaps the act of murder and the brutality of the burial were perceived by them not as a killing, but as a twisted game. However, it is nearly impossible to understand how such barbarity could be seen by anyone as a game. Burying a living person is the ultimate act of cruelty, one that defies justification. This case shook the entire nation. However, the case had one significant outcome. Narami, being a minor at the time of the crime, was still sentenced to life imprisonment. This marked the first case in Japan where a juvenile offender received such a severe punishment. The trial sent a powerful message. Even teenagers who commit heinous crimes cannot escape strict consequences. Noguchi's case became a turning point in Japan's fight against rising juvenile crime, demonstrating that age would no longer be an excuse for those who commit horrifying acts. Such a sentence can be considered just. Everyone who commits a crime must face appropriate punishment, don't you think? That's exactly how it should be. It's interesting to note that as of April 2022, Japan changed the age at which a person is considered an adult. Previously, adulthood began at 20 years old, but now it starts at 18. Along with this change came a new concept: special adolescence. This category applies to 18 and 19-year-old offenders. Unlike 17-year-olds, whose cases are still handled in family courts, special adolescents can face stricter punishments similar to those for adults. Their faces and names may also be made public. Many believe that the Noguchi murder case played a significant role in these legislative changes. The crime shocked Japanese society so deeply that it became a catalyst for revising laws concerning juvenile offenders. When we discuss juvenile crime or special judicial measures, Japan often serves as an example. If even there, in this close yet distant nation, the laws are becoming stricter, perhaps changes are imminent in other countries as well. I sincerely hope for a more just society where age is not an excuse, and everyone is held accountable for their actions based on the severity of their crimes. And with that, my story comes to an end. See you next time with a new case. Until then, take care. Goodbye.